Welcome to the Emerging Biotech Leader, where we help biotech leaders maximize the value of their therapeutics from translational development to product launch. We're your hosts. I'm Kim Kushner.
And I'm Ramin Farhad. We are here to help you navigate the pitfalls of the biotech industry and illuminate a path forward.
Welcome to today's episode of the Emerging Biotech Leader. I'm so glad to welcome Dr. Ed Tucker, multi-time Chief Medical Officer, to talk us through some really interesting topics around the role of the Chief Medical Officer, how you continue to differentiate your programs, how you can learn from various roles of the CMO and how they're all different, but the similarities that really tie these roles together, how you engage with various external stakeholders, whether it's regulators, KOLs, or PIs, or otherwise, and really building resilient, risk-tolerant teams that can really stand up to some of the changes in the industry. So Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Kim. It's a pleasure to be here. This is exciting to be on this. I've listened to many of the previous podcasts and learned a lot from previous speakers. So it's a privilege to be here today. Thank you.
Of course. To start us off, I mentioned that you've been a multi-time CMO. You've had such an interesting career trajectory, being a chief medical officer in public companies, private companies, big, small, kind of a little bit of you name it at this point. So can you tell us a little bit of an overview of your trajectory and what got you here?
Yeah, it's thanks. You're highlighting what is increasingly a longer career history now, which is kind of depressing in a way. But at the same time, I've had the privilege to work in amazing companies, both large and small. I'm a British trained physician from the UK. I started my pharmaceutical career in the UK, and then the last 22 years been in the United States. As I mentioned, working for large and then also startup biotechs as well. I think what that brings is a lot of good training in the larger pharma companies through Bayer, Johnson & Johnson, Roche, Genentech. And I think that was enabling for me to then take the big leap into small startup. I was very fortunate to move into a startup that was quickly acquired by a large pharma. So again, certainly applying some training wheels there for me to learn my trade, learn my wares, but also diversify my experiences and also my skill sets as well. So I think that's really foundational for later part of my career, which has been, as you said, multiple CMO in a number of biotechs now. And each one of those has allowed me to apply previous experiences and then also add to them. So I would say today, 10 years on from my first CMO role, I certainly hope and I think I'm a better CMO than I was 10 years ago.
Absolutely. And one of the things I appreciate digging into a little bit is what are the learnings that you've taken over those 10 years and what do you continue to learn about the role of the CMO and how it's changed kind of in that trajectory?
Well, I think that the best learnings are from the people to the left and to the right of you, both in your teams, but also I have the privilege of being very networked across quite a number of CMOs in the biotech industry as well. So my first sort of entry into the CMO world was when I wasn't a CMO. I attended the CMO Summit over in Boston. That was about 7 years ago. And created a lot of good networks and friendships there and learned from some of the best CMOs in the industry. And, you have certain ideas about what a CMO does, and then you actually start doing it. And then you ask your friends and you ask your CMO colleagues, how do you solve these problems? And I think you've heard on the previous podcast, the CMO role is very multifaceted. And so you can have strength in 3 or 4 of those when you first come in, be it from a developer or from a drug safety or early translational drug developer. But then there's all the other facets that you haven't probably had experience with. And those are things that you need to develop very quickly because the expectation is very high, particularly in public companies where you're facing externals such as investors and analysts who expect you to be the fully rounded CMO. And sometimes you're not. And sometimes you can fake it till you make it. And sometimes you have to learn the hard way. And those are things which I think build resilience as a CMO, and also it builds on those blindside skill sets that you need as you move through your career.
Absolutely. Maybe we can dig into that last point a little bit on the hard learnings when you're trying to, make it in front of some of these external stakeholders, whether it's the investors in public company or it's KOLs or PIs that you're hoping are going to enroll your pivotal trial. What are some of the hard learnings that you've identified along the way? Some things that you have stood out to you and that other people should really be thinking about?
I hear it time and time again, and I think it's a very true statement that I don't think it's hard learnings. I think it's good learnings, which is you and the CEO are those are the two important people in the relationship of communicating the clinical development strategy. And there needs to be consistency. We will be in front of investors and analysts hundreds of times a year in a public company. And it's critical that that relationship extends into how we communicate our science, our strategy, and our data as well. And there needs to be consistency across those three areas for messaging so that the recipients of those messages have absolute 100% clarity on what we're doing. They do not want to be in any doubt about the direction or the interpretation of the data. So I've been very honored to work with some really good CEOs where you actually are in the heads of your CEO, and fortunately the CEO is in my head as well. And what that generates is consistency. And so that builds confidence in the investor community. It also builds confidence internally as well, because many of these webinars and conferences are recorded like we're doing today. And so many of your staff want to see how you're leading from the front as well and working directly with the CEO. Again, that builds internal confidence within the company as well. That then leads forward to, if you're able to celebrate key successes in your clinical trial program, that washes back into the organization, and celebrating success externally builds a lot of enthusiasm and motivation for the teams internally as well.
Absolutely. You just got into two key points that I want to dig into. First, the relationship with the CEO and how critical that is in order to be successful as a CMO. So as you think about positioning yourself for a chief medical officer role, whether it's people looking for their first or for their fifth, what are some of the attributes that you're looking to vet during the interview process to make sure that you have a strong rapport with that CEO so you can be set up for success?
Well, I look back on my first CMO role, and when you're not a CMO and you want to be a CMO, then you're really pitching your, I would say, limited skills to a CEO who's looking for a CMO. And I think that the playing field is not as level as somebody who's been a CMO 2 or 3 times. And where I'm going with that is you're trying to impress the CEO rather than doing a diligence on the company. And if I were to have my time again, I would probably say that it's important for CMOs coming in, whether they're new or second or third time in their role, that they're also doing their diligence. It's really key to say, how can I work with this person? The CEO is doing that with the CMO, but the CMO needs to do that with the CEO as well. Because if there isn't that chemistry, it's going to be very hard to develop that when you're moving into the role. And that, I think, is a critical importance, that you have to feel as though you can work with this person very closely, and they can work very closely with you. So if I were to take one of the learnings from that, I think it's, do the diligence, do deep diligence, spend some time, have dinner, have coffees, go back several times. I think a mistake is if you interview once and you think you've got the job. Yes, you've got the job, but you probably haven't got the role.
Yeah, that's such a great learning on finding the right fit and that chemistry and how hard it is to identify it, but also cultivate it, especially if you've gotten into the wrong role.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think there's many CMOs who are probably in the wrong role right now. They took the opportunity because it was amazing science or super interesting or other attributes of the job, but they got the job, but they don't have the role in that way, and they really don't have the rapport to be set up for success. You also brought up a second point earlier about when you bring that external enthusiasm and you're able to bring the external stakeholders along, it makes it a lot easier to bring your team along and to build to that team that really sees the vision, is deeply aligned, and can really help execute. How do you think about the team building and building the functions, the people, and bringing them along in a way that makes a lot of sense for the future of the company?
Yeah, I think both of those are very self-reinforcing. So let's look at the engagement with the KOLs. Again, I've been very fortunate in my therapeutic areas that I've moved through. And a lot of people say to me, how have you been able to move through various different therapeutic areas? And that's because I've engaged very closely with the KOLs and the PIs. Because then I can position in my mind where the product potentially is going to be used the most. Where is it going to derive the most benefit for patients? But also as well, KOLs and PIs, I can say many of them are my good friends. Many of them are in my phone address book and we text, etc. But what it represents is a deep trust between myself and the KOLs and in reverse as well. The ability to share knowledge, the ability to really guide the clinical development program in a way that can meet the needs for patients, whether it's in North America, Europe, or rest of the world. And that is really key for us. Now, what that enables then is that relationship extends into my team. So when you're building teams that have access and have, I think, a CMO that is very close with their business partners in the site, with the study teams, etc., I just think it makes life a lot easier. I think work gets done so much easier when there's a relationship and there's a trust and a common commitment around where the vision of the product is going. Again, I think it's very contagious. I always preach in my small biotechs that it is really key for us to have a very close relationship with our PIs, because often the number of PIs that you have is probably limited because you're in the early stages of development. And so in doing that, you can solve problems quicker. You can help your team unlock problems much quicker than you can in a larger company that may be further removed from the PIs and the KOLs. So things that could take months can take minutes in a biotech. So that's really key, because then that's very motivating again for the team, that if we have problems, we get to them very quickly, we resolve them, and then we get on to the next challenge.
It's a really important point, because I think in a lot of early biotechs, depending on that feeling of security, people don't really step up and say, I see this issue, I want to solve it. They try to solve it themselves, and they kind of go heads down, and it creates mini silos in an organization that is too small to be siloed and really needs to be hyper-focused on execution and team orientation in order to deliver. And so how do you create even that the psychological safety, if you will, amongst your team when the stakes are so high in an early biotech?
Again, it wasn't perfect in previous roles, but what I've
it never is.
It never is. But I do think that anchoring to key documents that cover and remove some of that siloism across even the smallest of companies, you can get siloism. And I think that, your CDP, your product development plan, but most importantly, the TPP, which integrates my CMC colleagues with my commercial colleagues, with the development colleagues and the translational colleagues as well. So when you galvanize those three things together, then what you do is you look for what I call the longest pole in the tent, which is what's the thing that's going to limit me to get to my goal? And the ultimate goal is an NDA or an MAA on your product. So we're always looking across to say, how can we help the teams to make sure that we're all moving down that Gantt chart, and that there isn't a limiting factor, be it on the commercial side, the CMC side, or on the development side. And I think that then develops that camaraderie. The antithesis of that is where people say, stay out your swim lane. So stay out of my swim lane. I think that's a real negative thing. And I think that generates siloism and sort of functional independence. You can't be independent. It takes a village to move a drug to the end. We are fraught with risk in terms of developing a drug. A lot of things can go wrong. And that's why things do go wrong. And that's why you have sort of 80, 90% attrition rate from sort of first in human all the way through to commercial. So if we can eliminate some of those risks as a team and identify them early, what that means is we don't derail ultimately our clinical development program, but we can also help each other. Sometimes you can have a quality issue. Sometimes you can have a manufacturing issue. Sometimes you can have a recruitment issue. And it's applying those different things. It's asking commercial colleagues, is there a better way to advertise to our patients to bring them into the trials? Is there a better way of positioning the product? we're not all experts in everything. And I think that we need to leverage the expertise that we brought into the company to its maximum, allow people to fulfill their full potential in a company, not just in their functional role.
I totally agree. Two things that stand out to me from what you just described. One is I see a lot of early biotechs hire a bunch of seasoned people, and a number of those folks come in assuming that they can do the exact same playbook that they did last time and that they're going to get a successful result again, but not really appreciating that it's a different team and a different drug. And even if it's in the same therapeutic area, there are nuances to every company and program that have to be unique. And we can't assume it's going to work the exact same way over and over again. And in fact, I've never seen that actually work, to do the exact same thing over and over again. So there's a lot of the flexibility of mindset, recognizing that everything is going to need a semi-bespoke approach, and you're going to need to adapt every single time.
Yeah, I agree, Kim. But I do think there is a framework. I think there's a framework of approach. So it's not random when we go into a new startup biotech. There is a sort of formulaic or empirical approach. And then I think, to your point, then you bolt in those nuances. It's a new therapeutic area, it's a new modality, it's a new set of KOLs in a new market, or you're trying to displace current market to introduce something which is hopefully an improvement in patients' lives. And so I think it's a combination of both. And I think then, to your point about the skill sets that come in, often biotechs can't bring in the perfect person. And I would say in my past, and I'm certainly not the perfect person now either, is that there's huge learning opportunity when you bring a bunch of people together into a small biotech. Now, obviously, you want to bring some experience in there to drive what I was describing as that sort of framework, but then also as well bringing in the highly motivated people who may not have as much experience, but they can put so much energy into the program as well. So I think it's a really potent combination that if you find the best out of people and everybody gets to work to their potential, there's a high probability you're going to be successful as a team. And then I think, it's giving those maybe less experienced people the security that there's not a lot of things you can break in this system, because there's so many checks and balances. Many of the things we do are covered many, many times. Our regulations actually ask us to cover things that might happen so that we ultimately protect our patients, we protect their data. If you sort of step back for a moment, you think about how many checks and balances we have in our organizations. Even the most inexperienced people in our organization, they really can't break stuff because there's so many checks and balances to capture that. So I think that gives people the security that there's somebody more experienced, or there's a process that, look, if somebody does make a mistake, it's not fatal.
Right.
Literally for the patient, but also for the program. And we can recover from that. The antithesis, again, of that is if we don't allow people to try things, then we're not going to innovate. And you need to be able to allow people to try stuff. If it breaks, then we do something different. But if it works, that could be a major breakthrough. And I think that's really important for teams to have that secure space to not only try to do the same things we've been doing for the last 25 years, but do things differently as well.
Yeah, we do have to break the mold, and we need to be open to that innovation and create the space for it. But also appreciating, I really appreciate that point of, you can't really break it. It's not going to be destroyed, but you could break it intentionally in a way that's going to make it better. And so if we use those checks and balances in a really thoughtful way to consider that innovation, we can progress things and either accelerate them, innovate on them, or make them better overall. And hopefully that means, patients get access to medicines a lot faster, better than they ever have.
Great.
One other point you raised, Ed, and this is kind of within the context of the CDP path, and that ultimately, if you break down those silos, you operate as a unified team, you're really working towards that goal of the NDA or the MAA or something like that. And I'd say my team is probably, sick of me even saying this, but I would argue that the NDA or the MAA is not the end goal, but the end goal is that patients have, access to a medicine in a commercially viable way, that it's affordable, it's in their hands, their doctors know when and how to prescribe it, and that it's ubiquitous in their lives if that's what's appropriate. And when we think about the CDP does pretty much end when you get that approval, and you kind of really focus on that regulator as how do I get there? But how do you think about opening the development team's mindset to not just the regulator being your end stakeholder, but the physicians, the patients, the payers, all of these different stakeholders that really come in play in the more commercial world when a lot of early developers don't have that experience or don't have that early mindset?
Yeah, I think it almost seems premature in a biotech to be thinking about commercialization. But I actually, again, with my business school training as well, I've tried to apply that through my career as well, is what does the product look like out there in the commercial world? And, what will be the endpoints that drive some of those discussions around payers, formularies, access to medicines? What are the channels that we're going to be putting this medicine through as well? Is it going to be specialty specialty pharmacists? Is it going to be more commercial? Are you going to have a sales force, et cetera, et cetera? So these are some of the things that I think are very important to be thinking, even at the early stages. Again, the converse of that is in a biotech, you've got to really focus on being stage appropriate. And often the criticism is, well, we're in first in human. That's a good problem to have in 5 years' time when we think about commercial. But I think that's a mistake. I do think that you have to have a little bit of focus on what it's going to look like in the market. If you have a very crowded market already, how is that product going to differentiate? What are the measures that you're going to use to differentiate? And that does start to build back into your clinical development program, because that starts to think about, well, what do I need to demonstrate to investors around what endpoints I'm going to use to differentiate from the current market medicines. And so I do think that having the very long term is very, very important. And again, we all come with different experiences. So majority of my experiences are probably later stage development and into commercial. And then moving back in the life cycle into sort of first in human trials, you carry some of that extra thinking and thought process around, okay, so we're literally just entering into first in human, but I'm already thinking about commercial. And then it's making sure that it doesn't look like you're getting in front of your skis too much with the organization, where people say, he really doesn't understand that we're still in first in human. So I think it's having the end-to-end approach on drug development, including commercialization. And that's where I think the CMO can work very directly with commercial colleagues. Now, there may not be a lot of commercial colleagues in the organization for the reasons I've just alluded to, but having somebody, either a consultant or even the CEO who may have come through the commercial route, will be a good sounding board to think about how you're developing the TPP and the commercial plan.
It's such an important point. And one thing you and I have talked about in the past is having very safety conscious teams and teams that are thinking in this way. And what you just described to me is such an important differentiator, especially when you're looking at a crowded market, that as you're thinking about your first in human and you're trying to demonstrate safety, that safety can also be a strategic differentiator in a late stage program. And so you might think about that in how you design your first in human and how you're really demonstrating the safety profile of the asset from day one. And that could get to a point where you have patient preference and where you have a differentiated asset in what otherwise could be a really crowded market.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. I've been in companies in the past where we're second to market, and one of the key differentials is safety. And so I think then the function of safety moves from more operational execution and sort of risk mitigation in flight to, okay, how strategically can we differentiate our TPP based upon selectivity to the receptor, and then also ultimately the improved safety profile of the drug. And that has been really successful. I can think back to a particular molecule that we brought to market, second to market, much higher selectivity, much improved safety profile, and actually did incredibly well in the market. It really displaced the first entrant quite significantly. So I do think that safety can be strategic. I spent a good amount of time in safety in large pharma. and came to appreciate that, you can treat safety as more of a operational and sort of transactional function, but actually real strategic safety can have a major effect on the value of the asset and also de-risking that asset as well. And the last thing I'll just say on that as well is special populations. And this is where I think safety comes to the fore, which is really identifying differential safety in populations at risk. So pediatric safety, women of childbearing potential, and then also race and ethnicity as well. Are there clear or unclear safety differentials that can really be brought out in the TPP, again, that could benefit these subpopulations within your target population? So I think having a really strong safety person in your team, I think in those situations is very critical. Now, obviously, if you're in first in human, you're probably still at the early stages of drug development, and you don't have that knowledge around differentiation. But I would quickly move to, as soon as I have data, to move into differentiating on the safety profile as well. Because we look at benefit risk. We often think about the benefit, but we don't really fully underpin the risks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that you're a British trained physician and therefore you say benefit risk versus our US colleagues that always start with the negative and it's always risk benefit. And on this side of the pond, of course. One thing you keep coming back to, Ed, which I think is really important, is this concept of the TPP really being the driving light of what the team is working toward and how it integrates the voices across the entire development team, not just from a clinical perspective, but includes the potential commercial colleagues, the CMC colleagues, all of these other stakeholders in the organization. I have seen more and more early biotechs frankly feel that the TPP is a bit of a paper exercise, or that it's not really worth kind of slowing down to either formally codify it, or they feel it's kind of in the heads of enough people. They generally know what they need to do. One, is that something that you've seen? And two, how would you give advice to leaders in organizations where they've not spent the time to formally, codify what needs to be that go forward plan and a TPP or a version of a TPP?
Well, you probably saw me smile and the hair was going up on the back of my neck as you said the TPP is a paper exercise. I'm clearly on the side of TPP is really important. Why is it? Because I think the one word you said in there was assumption. Everybody assumes that everybody's doing the right things and we're all pulling exactly in the right direction. But the problem is this is a 10-year journey. And if you miss by an inch in the first week, you're going to miss by 100 miles by the time you get to 10 years. So it's really key that everything is lined up and everything's agreed, even down to the labeling. I mean, literally, you can start to plug in what your label is starting to look like probably after your phase 1B or into 2A, because the drug is starting to show its attributes. And so in doing that, you really want to then be thinking, well, how is this drug being positioned? So I do think the TPP is a good exercise. It's definitely not a paper exercise. And when I've engaged on TPP, it usually starts to bring out some interesting behaviors, because the behaviors are, those assumptions start to come out with both senior and some of the other staff in a company where they say, oh, I didn't know that was a problem, or I didn't know that was the way we were driving. And so that can bring out a little bit of the human, why didn't I know this sooner? And so then you say to yourself, well, why didn't we do the TPP exercise sooner? And again, it's stage appropriate. You're not going to do the TPP when you form the company. But I think it's too late if you're in phase 3, because by then, the humanistic horror of, well, I assumed this for 3 years and now I'm being told something different, that can be a major problem, because those assumptions start to move into the functions around how much inventory we need to generate, or what's the commercial viability, or what's the commercial potential, or you've had dialogues with potential strategics in terms of what the drug can do or what it can't do. We talked a little bit about safety as well. How are we mitigating that? What are some of the post-marketing requirements which may be necessary to actually commercialize this? And then also as well, regulatory. We haven't even talked about the regulatory science. How is this going to be perceived by the agencies? The agencies know a lot more than we do about the class because they often see 2 or 3 of the same molecules coming through from competitors. So they will have knowledge on your molecule and your class that you won't have. And so getting that information back into your TPP, and also as well, it's what information could be missing as well. And that's another key piece, is when you start looking at the TPP, you realize there's a whole raft of things that the company should be thinking of. So there's a little bit of a checklist effect of TPP as well. And often after you've gone through I will use your phrase, the paper exercise, you actually usually have literally 24 action items from every meeting. And one of the agreements is, well, let's come back in 3 months, or let's come back in a week and revisit. And I think it galvanizes the team. And I think it's a little bit cathartic for the team. It's like, well, what keeps me awake at night are the assumptions of the rest of the team on myself around the product. So that helps me sleep easier as well, knowing that we've done a full diligence on the molecule, on the asset, and that we're all locked in step in terms of where we need to go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think we definitely get lost in this idea of, do we want to take the time? Is this the right time? To your point, is the stage appropriate? Are we really going to get all the right voices at the table? And what are we going to do with it when we get to the other end? And I do think it kind of uncovers the need for certain thinking or certain types of resources in the organization. It gives you a great plan for how you're going to direct future resources. But as you were talking about what it takes to get the right people around the table, I think a lot about the analogy of 2 people on a kayak, and one's rowing one way and one's rowing the other, and suddenly you capsize entirely. And I think that's an unfortunate one that always is top of mind when we think about this idea that you could be 3 years into running a program and not recognize that you and the person that sits across from you might be doing things that are almost in opposition to where the outcome really needs to be.
I would add as well that the people around the table discussing the TPP are also connected to our competitors or our competitors' intelligence. So our clinical operations team will know how the competing programs are at the sites. They'll know how our recruitment is standing up in comparison with our feasibility and what we thought. Maybe there are some studies that have dropped off because some molecules either have dialed back, or they've slowed down, or their protocols aren't as attractive as what we hope our protocols are. So there are different pieces of information that can come in from the scientific community. Obviously, medical affairs and commercial can, accumulate competitive intelligence from our congresses, and also what's online as well. We can see submissions, we can see feedback from the agency to assets which are further along in their review, and all of those pieces of information can shape the TPP. Because if you literally hunker down in a dark room and try and develop a drug for 10 years and not sort of build in some of that intelligence, you may be very regretful at the end of that exercise.
Yeah, I think a lot of organizations take too much time kind of working out what they want to do before they start to get input from the external community. And at that point, it's a little too late to pivot, and they really don't have all the right inputs to make the smart decision. So I definitely agree with that. One last question for you, Ed. As you think about next steps within your career and where you were 10 years ago, for a first-time CMO, what's one piece of advice you would give them as they're thinking about embarking on this role and some of the opportunities in the market?
Wow, what a question. I would say the first thing is don't even believe you're even close to knowing everything. It's a huge pressure when you move into a role that you're supposed to know everything. And I would look back on 10 years ago, and I'm sure maybe some people that worked with me 10 years ago are thinking, well, he told me he knew everything, and now he's telling me 10 years on he didn't. Well, that's experience for you. I truly believe that every day is a learning experience, and that can sound a little bit contrite and a bit twee sometimes, but it really is. I think if you're open, you're curious, and you're just accepting that, you're a lump of clay that's waiting to be something more spectacular every day. And in doing so, you're just in receipt of everybody else's knowledge. And early in my career, I was probably a little bit more sort of rambunctious and, aggressive, etc. But as you move further through your career, the humility of realizing there is no way that you can know everything. And there are people around you that can support you. And I have to say, as I've made transitions between different companies as well, my CMO network is incredible. And I value them a lot. And I'm sure some of these people will be listening today, and I want to thank them, because there are moments where you have a really awful day. Stuff didn't work. Your data didn't show up the way it was going to. And those are the people that will call you spontaneously and say, you know what, that's part of being a CMO. We're in a business that has high attrition and high failure rate. And it's not personal. And you can do all the right things and still end up with what you perceive as the wrong result. And I think that is where resilience comes in. But it doesn't come from an individual. It's collectively the various different CMOs come together and network, and they understand, look, it's your turn to celebrate and, get your NDA or your MAA or your commercial or your exit from your small biotech that's been acquired. But more often, as a CMO community, we deal with failure, and it's hard to take that. Now, if you're a first-time CMO and you have a great success, well, then maybe you're the lucky one. I would probably stop being a CMO at that point and walk away with your 100% success rate, because it's not going to get any better than that. And as you move on, your percentage success rate generally will get to industry standards. So don't get too giddy on 100% on your first gig. But in all seriousness, it is the resilience part. And somebody told me once, resilience is far better than endurance. You don't want to endure being a CMO. That's not fun. And it's very, very stressful. And resilience is where you accept that you accept your own limitations, but you also accept the limitations of the business, and you celebrate those successes, and you take the failures on the chin.
Absolutely agree. I think that's fantastic feedback, really focus on that resilience and how you build that up as you really think about moving into the role, but especially as you take on the role. And I think the second piece that I just took from that is thinking about your network and how do you really lean into them as thought partners and friends to really help get you through the hard days, but also to celebrate the good ones. So, Ed, thank you so much for the really great insights and for joining the show today.
Thank you, Kim. It's been a real pleasure. And I hope that a few of these words might be helpful for people out there to listen to the podcast. But this has been really good. Please keep doing it, because I think I enjoy it, and I think a lot of people do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Emerging Biotech Leader, an SSI strategy podcast. Join us each month for more conversations with biotech leaders. If you'd like to help navigating the complexities of biotech, reach out to our team at ssistrategy.com. Don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review.